Hi everybody. I've been asked to do a video or a series of videos to help Irish box players, or C#D players anyway, know where to choose what basses and what chords will fit into where in a tune. And it's a big subject, but we'll make an attempt, shall we, Chapper? We'll teach you about the 3-chord trick. In this first video anyway, we'll look mainly at accompanying tunes that are in the key of D. So let's get on with it without further ado. Now, knowing what chords and basses to play in a tune is of course the realm of harmony, the subject of harmony, which is a huge subject. And the first thing to realize is that what you can do regarding harmony and regarding bass accompaniment on an accordion like this is really very limited in comparison with other instruments. That's not to say you can't produce satisfying and accompaniments that will add a lot of interest to the tunes that you play. You can, but within certain limited parameters. And one thing I would say is if you're playing with an accompanist, a good accompanist, you must realize that they will make many harmonic choices that are not available to you, and they will be able to get chords that you can't get. Even if you have them on your box, you might not be able to get them against certain notes and so on, and they will use more coherent harmonic progressions very often. So if you're playing in a band situation with a guitarist or a good pianist or other accompanist, or even in a session, it's as well to let them get on with the harmonic accompaniment for the most part. Alright, so realize that. Now, I mentioned in the introduction the 3-chord trick, which you often hear mentioned disparagingly about the accompanying the abilities of certain accompanists. But the 3-chord trick is the most basic set of chords that we'd use in a particular tune. Now, we'll look at D major for this first video, and the 3-chord trick in D major is composed of 3 chords: D, obviously, G, and A. So you get something like this. There's the 3-chord trick. And without going into too much theory, I can tell you that this is also known as 1-4-5. D is 1 because it's the first degree of the scale, the first note of the scale. G is the 4th degree of the scale, so that is the 4 chord, also known by the way as subdominant. And A is the 5th degree of the scale, or the dominant. And the thing about the dominant chord is, there's the dominant. It leads us back to the tonic, or the first chord, the 1. So there we have our 1, 4 and 5, which are D, G and A, and or tonic, subdominant and dominant. And without going into too much theory again, it is useful to know the notes that make up these 3 chords. Now, you know, or you should know, that on a box with a D row, any note on the D row is either a D, an F sharp, or an A, or a D, an F sharp, A, D, F sharp, A, F sharp, D. And D, F sharp and A is the triad, the major triad. The chord of D major is made up of D, F sharp and A, and that's what you get over here. So any note on the push on your D row is part of the D major chord. So D, F sharp and A make up the D major chord. The G chord, or the 4 chord, is made up of G, B and D. Now obviously the G and the B on this row, we have them in the pull direction, and the D is in the push direction. So if we want to play a G chord against a D push note, you have to have a G push bass, which not everybody has, but I have there. And the remaining notes are A, and if you want to play an A chord against the note of A push, you have to use this A chord up here. And the C sharp and E, A, C sharp, E, C sharp and E are both available on the push here. So it's as well, if you can, to memorize those notes. If you can't, it's no big deal. We can manage this lesson without, but D, F sharp and A are part of the D chord. The G chord is composed of G, B and D, and the A chord is composed of A, C and E. And just for interest, each of those chords, each major triad is made up of the first, the third and the fifth degree of its particular scale. So D major, third is F sharp, fifth is A, G major, the third is B, the fifth is D, A obviously is the first of A, the third is C sharp and the fifth is E. So 1, 3 and 5 are the notes of the chord, and the chords that go with any key are 1, 4 and 5. Alright, is your head busting yet? Let's look at how this works out in practice for accompanying tunes in D. Now, to see how the 3-chord trick might fit into a typical dance tune in the key of D, let's look at a jig called Tobin's Favourite, and I would accompany this something like this. So, if we go through the melody, the first part of the tune is very much an ascending arpeggio of D. So a D chord. Now you may not necessarily hold a D chord or a D bass all the way through those notes. The rhythmic way that you accompany those tunes we're not getting into now, we're just looking at the harmonic aspects. Then we get this phrase, which is E, C sharp, A, which is definitely an A chord. Now, to get the A chord against the A, note A, we have to move up there, but we can just miss it out. D, note of G here, we'll play a G chord, and then A, so basically D, A, D, G, A. Now I was playing a G chord against the high G here, and then everything else was an A chord. I had to miss out, stop the chord there, so that I wouldn't play a D chord against the A note here. And then I resumed the A chord here. Wait a minute, that's a note of G there. How come I played an A chord instead of a G chord there? Well, it's because the note G is the 7th of the chord of A, and what we call an A7th, that is an A chord with a additional note of G, heightens this feeling of the tonic wanting to go back to the dominant. So the A7 chord there, I could have played a G there, but the note of G against the A chord gives us added tension. Now I choose that tune of Tobin's Favourite quite deliberately, because if you were playing that on a one-row melodeon with only D and A, you would find that those chords would actually work quite well for the whole tune. Now there, instead of playing a G chord, I'm playing the A chord obviously, against the note of G, which again is our 7th. And we can play that A chord all the way down, giving us an A7 and back to the tonic. And that is why you can get away in simple tunes in D a lot of the time using melodeon style basses. The one note where the A chord will not work so well is against the note of B. So Tobin's favourite, as it happens, has basically no B's in the tune, and so we were able to get by very well. But as soon as you play a D tune that has prominent notes of B in it, you're going to be wanting to use the G chord. For example, let's say here's B note, G chord against a B note, so as soon as you get B's in an emphasized part, accented B's in the tune, you're going to need a G chord. You're going to have to abandon your melodeon style basses. So you can do a lot with those chords only, and a tune like the one I was just showing you, that's called Miss Lion. Now the other approach, of course, would be, if you're playing the key of D, just experiment with the 3-chord trick, D, A and G, and you'll probably find out which chords fit where in the tune, and that will be very instructive. In the next video, I think we'll look at a different key or keys, but there is your basic 3-chord trick. Now, of course, you could, especially if you have a box with some extended harmonies, you can use different chords. You can often use B minor chords, even F sharp minor chords in G tunes, and even perhaps the occasional E minor instead of a G, and things like that. But maybe that's beyond the scope of the 3-chord trick, and we'll look at substitutions like that in a different video. So I hope this has been of some use. Now there's one thing I forgot to say, which is that it's interesting, in the key of D, the bisonoric nature of the standard bass layout actually can work in our favour quite often. You'll know if you've seen some of my other videos, and I'll link to them in a moment, that for playing reels, I often think it's a very good idea to not play too many bass notes on the beat, but to often play chord taps on the offbeat. And here's an example. This is a typical phrase that you might find to end a reel. Not quite sure which tune that would come out of, but there's plenty, I'm sure. We've got a lot of inning and outing on the dictated by the treble side. And if most of those chords are D and A, so if we were to hold the basses the whole time, you get a lot of, now that's rather heavy. If we omit playing on the beat, so it works out that tapping the offbeat, we're automatically on the right chord a lot of the time. So that's just an interesting fact, and you can avoid all that inning and outing and just stay with the offbeat and you'll be right. And if you watch a lot of the older Irish box players particularly, you'll notice that there's a lot of flailing away on the offbeat with the chords, and this is why it works basically. So I hope that's useful too.